Welcome back, folks. This is Jay from Cold Nights, and this is episode 4 of the Cold Takes podcast. Tonight, we have a very special guest. I've coined a whole bunch of wonderful nicknames for him. The godfather of figures, Toy Lord. He is the ultimate toy collector that I have seen on YouTube. We have Cesar from ScorpioCesar, CesArcade. How are we doing tonight, sir?
Doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, for sure. So I know that before the podcast, we were talking a little bit about the duality of the two channels you have. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about the two channels that you run on YouTube?
Sure. So when I started on YouTube, I started around 2010 is when I started making content regularly. And now going back to my early channel, my main channel, which is what I like to call it, it started off with video games. And it was kind of just like me sharing my love for the hobby, as most of us tend to do. And, like going back to some of those videos, they're kind of cringe today, but it's nice to go back to see where I started. So I focused on, just video games that I was collecting. I did a lot of unboxings for games like special editions because back then websites like IGN and all those like popular websites that get things early nowadays didn't really do unboxings. So I tend to focus more on that back then. I try to do some game reviews as well here and there and skits along with those. But then at some point, I started transitioning my content uh, into action figures, like adult collectibles. And at some point, I ended up kind of like forgetting about the gaming aspect, which at the time there was a reason for it. I really didn't have the upgraded setup that I needed, like a capture card. And I was basically filming with my camera off a TV screen for gameplay. As you know, at a certain point in time, that was no longer acceptable. So I never really upgraded and adapted with the times. So I changed my focused on the action figure side of things. But then I always had that like itch deep down inside, like I want to talk about video games again. So what I did was around 3 years ago, I ended up making a separate channel, which is the ScorpioCesar to basically start off from scratch, start new, see whatever fan base I had from the original channel, see if that carried over into the new channel. But I just wanted a fresh start and I wanted to talk about video games, sharing my love for the hobby, as most of us do, while also showing that, starting a collection in video games isn't that hard to do, but you got to know what you're doing. You got to have some modicum of, like you have to budget yourself. There's got to be some restraint there, but at the same time, it's not impossible to build up a decent collection of video games if that's what you're looking to do. So that's basically what I'm trying to do on this channel and share that.
Well, I can definitely say for all the listeners, I've watched basically all of your latest stuff, and Caesar really does some amazing stuff. He made a video a couple of weeks ago with a custom GameCube that he had ordered. Um, that was the teal one, I believe. And you got that from England, right?
Yeah, so the guy that sold me that GameCube on eBay, he does like a lot of modifications to certain consoles. Like he'll sell like an RGB modded N64. But what caught my eye was this GameCube. Now, the reason why I wanted to jump on this GameCube was because, first of all, the color was beautiful. Like you don't really see a teal GameCube that often because they were never really officially made. So the only teal GameCube merchandise that was ever created was the actual controller, but it never had a console to really go with it. So I saw this and I was like, oh, this guy modded it so that it could run Swiss. And anybody who has a modded GameCube and knows Swiss is like a game changer. So I jumped on it. I was like, this is definitely something that I need. My current GameCube at the time was starting to, I guess, kind of like show its age. Certain games just wouldn't work on it. And also the controller was not really working for certain games. It's kind of weird how it just started acting up on me, but yeah.
Yeah, so he definitely makes some different content, because a lot of the content creators we watch, they're buying retail games and showing them off, and that's great. But to see some of the specialty items that he has in his collection, and the fact that he not only covers modern games but retro games, really makes the channel interesting to look into. So I definitely think that everyone needs to go check it out for sure. So one of the things we always like to talk about, Cesar, is people's histories in gaming. And I know me and you have had some pretty lively conversations on Twitter about the Dreamcast and Shenmue and things like that. So can you give us like a little brief rundown of how you got into gaming and your journey through gaming?
All right. So the earliest memories I have of gaming was, well, we were a Nintendo household growing up, and I remember just at some point we had the Nintendo Entertainment System in our household, and I had three older sisters, and we would occasionally play it here and there. I remember fondly playing a little bit of Mike Tyson's Punch Out on that thing. We had Super Mario Brothers, Duck Hunt. I remember in particular was pretty fun with the little zapper,
Nice.
and I had also Super Mario Brothers 3 was kind of like the big game at the time. And it's weird how there are certain things I just can't remember from like months ago, but I can always remember the time that the Nintendo Entertainment System started screwing up on us. I have no idea what caused it. It was probably a simple fix now that you think about it. Uh, but yeah, it just stopped working at some point, and it was like, there was a lot of things there to distract me. Like I had a bunch of toys and stuff. Like nothing's changed there, but like gaming was always kind of like a little thing that I enjoyed. And then one day I just wake up from a nap and my father and sister are playing the Super Nintendo in the living room with a ton of games bundled with it. And I'm just like, what is this? This is new. This is amazing. And this has to be maybe like early 1994, 1995. I forget when the Super Nintendo came out in the US, but I was born in 89, and I can remember that day in particular. It had to be sometime around 95, 96, because we had games like Mortal Kombat on it. We had Super Mario World, Super Mario All Stars. So it had to have been after the system was out for a while in the US. And from there, it was just like we had the Super Nintendo, and then I remember my father renting from Blockbuster, because remember Blockbuster, you could rent consoles from them.
Hmm.
He rented the Nintendo 64 at some point, and we were blown away by Mario 64. I could still remember like yesterday having that controller in my hand and that 3D movement with that analog stick. It was wild. I could remember that. Just good times with the Nintendo 64. We didn't get it back then, but he always told us, my father will always tell us, get a good report card, and that'll be like your gift for the summer. We got the Nintendo 64 that summer. So we grew up with Nintendo consoles mainly. I do remember my father renting the PlayStation, the original PlayStation, and at some point we ended up buying it, but he didn't seem too satisfied with it. I personally loved it. So he ended up taking it back. And I never told anybody this, but I remember the day he took it back to the store because he wasn't satisfied with what he played. And I was actually hiding underneath my desk crying, because I was like, I didn't really get a chance to experience what this console has to offer.
Oh,
And it's funny that I think back on it. I think at some point I told my father that I kind of missed the PlayStation. So at some point he ended up buying it again, and we just continued gaming from there. Now, in terms of Sega, it's a little more convoluted. The only time I ever got to like experience the Sega Genesis was at my mother's friend's son's birthday party. I I told this in one of my videos, and it was pretty funny thinking back on it because I kind of started my own console wars with this kid. And this is not intentional, but at some point I was playing his Sega Genesis. We were playing Sonic the Hedgehog 2. That was my first experience with a Sonic game.
Mhm.
And I was liking it, but the kid was being a jerk about it. And it pissed me off to the point where I was just like, you know what? Your console, your Sega is cheap. So from that point forward, he locked me out of his room, so I couldn't play the Sega Genesis anymore, and rightfully so. But granted, he was being a jerk about it. So that always kind of left a bad taste in my mouth when it came to Sega. I
The funny thing is, I can remember growing up, nowadays as grown adults that put a lot of money into our collections, we can buy all of the consoles if we want to.
Mhm.
But like I remember I had Super Nintendo and my friend Dane had the Sega, and it really was just like you say, a little console war. Because I of course I wanted a Sega, but we didn't have the money for me to have both. So we all kind of put all of our effort behind the system we had. And on the playground at school, we'd be arguing about which one had the better games and better graphics and better sound. So I can totally relate to that and totally remember that.
100%. That was how I was growing up. I mean, we have nowadays as an adult kind of a disposable income at times where we could just buy whatever we want. Uh, Back then, it was like you got maybe one or two, maybe three games a year, and that was it. So we always had to make sure those games counted, and whatever games we did get, we had to be happy with them. It's not like you could just trade them in at GameStop at the time. I
Right.
don't think GameStop was even around back then.
Yeah, I definitely remember defending some shitty games.
I always was interested in the Sega Saturn because I remember seeing the commercials for like Nights into Dreams, and I was like, wow, that looks amazing. But I don't know what it was. I think my father just never really like took notice of Sega's consoles, and we just never got them. I played the Dreamcast maybe once or twice at my cousin's place because my cousins, oh, forget about it. They always had the newest and greatest consoles and a bunch of games because there were three boys. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
their father spoiled them. I mean, my father spoiled me too as best as he could, but they used to get everything, and I discovered a lot of great games and consoles from them. And the Sega Dreamcast was one of those consoles where I just, I barely got a chance to really play, but from what I did play, I was like, this is cool. But once again, I never asked for it. It was never on my radar. So we eventually got the PS2, and I have to credit my brother-in-law for really getting me back into gaming with the sixth generation because I had the Nintendo 64 and PlayStation 1, and that was basically it. We get games here and there for it, but it was never really like something that I was really hardcore into. And once he got us the PlayStation 2 for Christmas, it was just like the rest is history. From that point forward, gaming was like a necessity for me. I had to get every console I could moving forward.
So I'm curious, what were the first couple of games you had for the PS2?
Oh, the first one was definitely Ace Combat 4.
No.
That was the one game I can say that we got with the console. And I love Ace Combat 4. Such a good game. And I love the series since then. Ace Combat 4, my sister ended up getting Crazy Taxi because she remembers playing it with my cousins on the actual Dreamcast. So she asked for Crazy Taxi. She got that. And that Christmas, I ended up getting WWF SmackDown Just Bring It.
Nice.
So those were my first PS2 games.
Yeah, I remember mine being Summoner. So many people don't even know what that is. It was like this isometric, almost like a Diablo clone, and I got so into that. And I don't remember exactly which title it was, but one of the Armored Core games. And I got so hardcore into that, and that kind of helped develop my love and appreciation for mechs.
I've never played, I think I've played one Armored Core game, and that's a shame because I heard it's such a great series.
Yeah, I know they really were. I played the older ones, on the like original Xbox on PS2. I never really kept up with it, but those original releases were really good.
The Armored Core series is it like a strategy game, or is it like a Mech Assault game? You remember Mech Assault?
Yeah, yeah. There's not really so much strategy to it. I mean, there was a huge emphasis on like your loadout and upgrading the parts of your mech, but it was kind of like a hack and slash. Like once you were in the arena,
Mhm.
you were just kind of going at it, and you had your setup that you made, and you had your skills and the different like missiles and things that you could use. But really more of an action game as opposed to like a tactical like combat game.
Oh, okay. See, I know they're remaking the original game, and I think that one was more tactical. At least it looks like it from the gameplay, but I probably have to watch some more gameplay of it.
So how did you do with the PS3? Did you get really into that?
Oh, well, PS3 was a little complicated because of that price tag.
Yeah.
That price tag was no joke. I remember getting really into like the GameCube and the Xbox at some point around the PS2. During the sixth generation, I owned all those three consoles, and
Nice.
it always went from GameCube to Xbox and then to PS2. So the PS2 was my least favorite of the three, still is to this day. So going into the seventh generation, we started off with the 360. And when the PS3 came out, there was nothing really on that console that stood out to me.
Mhm.
And I just didn't really like, we still were interested, but that price tag, we had to wait for the price to drop. And I believe the price dropped on that pretty quickly, didn't it?
Yeah. I mean, that was a pretty obscene start, so they had to.
Yeah, so we did get the PS3, and I liked it. I really did. I loved the way it looked. The original launch model. Oh,
Mhm.
such a shiny, beautiful console. I have one to this day hooked up now. One of the few consoles that I actually went into to change a few things in recently, but the original PS3, the launch model that we had, ended up dying on us.
Yeah, they're pretty customizable and they can take a pretty good beating too. My son, he's 12 now, but he had his opened up because the damn thing sounded like a jet engine and it was like overheating and everything.
Yeah.
And he ended up like taking the cover off of it and looking up all these different like hacks to do on it and stuff. So every time I'd go in his room, there's like this naked, stripped down PS3 frame. And I'm like, what is going on here? You're 12.
Oh my god. He's a prodigy.
Yeah, right.
This Get him a soldering iron. He's gonna be going into consoles and modding them at this point.
Yeah, he can do all my repairs and mods for me.
Yeah, seriously. Like at that age, like I'm afraid just opening the darn thing now.
Yeah.
I went into it. I changed the thermal pads. I got rid of the thermal paste. I put some new one in it because I want this one to last. I don't want to get the yellow light of death again. But I know it sounds like a jet engine about to take off, and you're right, it does produce a ton of heat. So I ended up getting one of the later models uh, power supply units and putting it in that one, so it doesn't get as hot or sound as loud, but it still gets pretty decently hot.
So what do you do with like current consoles? Are you a Xbox guy? Are you a PlayStation guy?
I try to play everything at this point. I don't have any really like allegiance to any certain console manufacturer. At this point, I just like to experience everything that I can. But I did get the PlayStation 5 just last week.
Yeah, great video on that too.
Thank you. I figured Xbox really doesn't have anything exclusive going for me right now, for anybody for that matter. And I still have the One X, and I feel like with the One X and even the PS4 Pro, that the current gen, the PS5 Series X, they're not that necessary. I just kind of wanted to get the PS5 just so I can say, hey, I have it. So when the heavy hitters start coming out for it this year, I'm ready.
Yeah, good way to think.
And like the Switch that's been like my go-to. I love the Switch, but it desperately needs some type of upgrade at this point. We need the Switch 2.
Yeah, it's really strange how that's going. I had talked about it with Viking and Brandon, that Nintendo has vastly inferior hardware, yet they're more or less winning the console war. Xbox and Microsoft and Sony are kind of going at it and tearing each other up with all these exclusivity deals and all that. And Nintendo's just kind of on the side winning with like a last gen console.
Yeah, it feels like it's like two generations late at this point, the Switch. Because I don't see it more than a souped up Wii U at this, you know what I mean? The Wii was like a souped up GameCube, so they've been behind since the sixth gen. And I miss when they were actually competent when it came to hardware. But I mean, the sales don't lie. The Switch it's a hit. What reason do they have to make it more powerful?
Do you think they'll announce anything this year or next year about that?
I think next year should be like they have to announce something soon. If not this year, then definitely next year. Because I mean the reports are saying, like the rumor and innuendo, that the Switch Pro is canceled and they're actually going to go ahead with the Switch successor. My only hope, if that's true, is that it's 100% backwards compatible, because if it's not, we're going to have a problem on our hands.
Yeah, I would hope that that would be the case because, yeah, there'd be people in the streets, I think.
No, I'll grab my pitchfork too and join them.
Yeah, join the mob for sure. All right, so we're going to go to break, and we have a very special announcement for next week's show. And when we come back, we're going to get into Caesar's true expertise, his incredible toy collection. So hang tight. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to another Rebuilding the Game Wall short. Today, I'm going to be completing my loose disc copy of Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess on the Nintendo GameCube. And I'm so happy to finally have this complete once again. Hello everybody, welcome back to the CesArcade for another short. Did you know that popular toy company Playmates actually released some Turok action figures back in the days? That's right, this one is of Adon from her appearance in Turok 2, Seeds of Evil.
All right, we are back from the break, and we are here once again with Caesar from ScorpioCesarcade. You still hanging in there?
Yeah, I'm here, I'm good. I'm hanging in.
So, I think what a lot of people are going to be tuning in to hear about is what we're going to talk about next, and that is that incredible toy collection you have. So, I'm curious about a couple things, kind of how you got started in collecting, adult, really fancy, expensive figures and collectibles and statues, and kind of, the breadth of your collection. What some of this stuff's worth. Exactly what you have, and also for the listeners and viewers, we will be in post edit putting up a ton of awesome pictures that Caesar sent me of his collection, and you will be impressed, I can tell you that. So why don't you go ahead, Caesar, and tell us a little bit about him.
Okay, well, I've always grew up with action figures, toys, collectibles, but I didn't really start getting hardcore into collecting till about 2016, 2017. So not too long ago, I started this vast collection of collectibles of like my childhood favorite franchises. And it didn't really start until after the apartment fire that happened in 2017.
Damn.
So yeah, the my basically my childhood home was wrecked. I tend to bring it up in certain videos in terms of like rebuilding the game wall. The whole idea behind the rebuilding the game wall is because the original one was destroyed. There was a ton of water damage that came down to our apartment. We were on the second floor and the fire was above us. So I don't know if it's some type of like trauma of seeing basically my childhood completely wrecked by all the damage that was created. I like I kind of think that's where it all started, where I was just like, I still have a lot of the collectibles, like the Godzilla stuff from 2016 that I would manage to save, but a good majority of things did not make it.
Oh,
I wasn't able to save a lot. I did save quite a few, but not everything. And that kind of just triggered me into this collectible frenzy where I just started going on eBay. And this was around 2017. I was staying with my uncle in Queens, and he was very thankful to him for allowing me to stay with him at the time, because I still needed to get to work, and traveling from Pennsylvania, where my parents had a house, wasn't really ideal at the time.
mm,
So I stayed with him. Me and my fiance at the time would stay with him, and I was there for about a year. So he wasn't charging me any rent. He wasn't going to charge me at all. So, I offered as like anything I could help with, and he's like, no, no, just use this time to find a place of your own. And I did, but at the same time, like I said, a lot of disposable income started coming in, and I started looking at eBay. I was like, what do I really like? What are the creatures, the franchises, the movie series that I really enjoy besides Godzilla? And then I started getting into like collecting Alien, Predator, those, Fox franchises. I just started buying up a bunch of lots. And that sent me on a crusade to basically buy series and franchises from my childhood and having them represented on my wall. Star Wars, Jurassic Park, Power Rangers, a little bit of Kamen Rider. I got into Ultraman. I started collecting figures from those lines. I saved some of my anime figures and I started building that collection up too. So it was just kind of like a downward spiral. Not necessarily saying it's a bad thing, but as you can imagine, these figures were expensive. A lot of them were. So I just went on a cruise. I just started buying up a bunch of these figures, and luckily at the time, a lot of them were still pretty affordable. But now, if you look at some of the prices of some of these collectibles, they've skyrocketed on the aftermarket. It's insane.
so would you say you during that time made some pretty wise investments? So you think you've got a good return on them so far?
Oh, hands down, definitely. Now, my goal isn't to sell any of these, but in the case that I ever get into trouble financially, knock on wood, uh, I have a good return on these. The Godzilla ones in particular. It's a line called the SH Monstars line, and it's made by Bandai and Tamashii Nations. They are super articulated, highly detailed collectibles of like Godzilla, all the foes Godzilla's faced and allies, and they basically sculpt these things to look like the actual suit that they use in the movies,
That's
down
awesome.
down to a T. So there is one in particular, well, there's a bunch of them actually, but there are a few that maybe retailed. I got them for around 80 bucks, $100. They're now going for like close to $500 on aftermarket.
Wow.
Yeah, it's insane. It's sad, but it's crazy. The aftermarket for these figures is wild.
So with a collection that big, and as you can see, I'm putting pictures up for the folks. You can see what he has here. Cesar, how do you decide what you're going to buy now to add to that collection?
It's funny that you mentioned that because it's gotten increasingly more difficult to buy any more figures because I'm running out of room on these shelves. You know what I mean? Like, I got to the point actually last year where I was looking at my collection and I'm like, I'm satisfied. I can focus this collecting habits on something else, which ended up being the video games aspects. I started collecting more video games and stepping away from the action figure scene because recently action figures in particular are starting to get a little more expensive because of the inflation, as you can imagine. So I really like to have to really pick and choose and be picky with what I get next. It has to be something that, like I really must have. So basically anything that comes out for the SH Monster Arts line, which was like the first line that I really started seriously collecting, I kind of have to get out of necessity. But there are a lot of figures that have come out that I've been able to look at them and say, I don't really need this. I want it, but I don't need it.
That's probably a smart way to look at it, because I know in my own experience that the figures can go from being like a real nice, neat looking display to quickly looking like a thrown together horde.
Yeah, and I started noticing overcrowding on my shelves, and it's not pretty. And one of the things my goal was when collecting was to make sure they looked pretty. People can actually look at them and not be like, oh, that's too much. You know what I mean? Like it's just a mess of figures. No, I like to keep things organized, and I like to have every character, every monster, front and center to kind of like, you can see them without having to really like push your face into the shelf. I try to display them all neatly as best as I can, basically.
Yeah, and if you guys are seeing these pictures here, I was shocked when he was sending me the pictures over Twitter. You really display it well, man. You might have a secondary career in like interior design. Like it looks really good.
Yeah, I have all this space downstairs in this house, and I figured, I was like, you know what? If this is gonna be the man cave, I'm gonna make this place my vacation spot. You know what I mean? Like this is when I go on vacation, I just go downstairs, man. I'm surrounded by my hobbies and I love it. It's like my safe haven. It's just being surrounded by all this stuff that I never thought I would be able to get when I was younger. It's just I like to make sure it's all nice and neat. I should probably dust a lot of these shelves more often, but when you get a lot of figures like this, it's kind of hard to do that.
Yeah, that must be one hell of a job.
It'll take too long.
So, one of the things I was curious about seeing all these beautiful figures, if you had to pick three, let's say, holy grails that you have in your figure collection, what would you say they are?
All right. So I can tell you my holy grails by looking at the pictures now. All right. So in one of the photos on a brown shelf, there's a bunch of Godzilla Trendmasters figures. Those were the figures I grew up with during the 1994, 1995. And I had all of those most of those originally as a kid, but I didn't take good care of them. And of course, I didn't have them anymore after a certain point until I just recently bought them up again. Now, the one on the very left is Space Godzilla. To get that guy complete without any pieces of him missing in the shape that I got him in was a holy grail moment. Another holy grail would have to be the Millennium Falcon. That's the vintage collection Millennium Falcon, the reproduce. I think it was a reprint they did for that one. That was the first toy, like first collectible that I spent big money on. It was always a holy grail of mine to get a big Millennium Falcon. I had the original one growing up, not like one of the original ones. I got it for Christmas, but this one is like 5 times bigger and more accurate.
Nice.
So that's another one. And then there's these 2 boxes of Godzilla Anniversary Collection boxes. And as you can see, the figures are still in those boxes. I had those action figures growing up as a kid. Like I said, didn't take really good care of them, but I ended up hunting them down again recently and actually getting them complete in their boxes. And I'm having a really hard time opening those because that's another holy grail of mine. So there's your 3 right there.
Beautiful. Now, me, I definitely don't have the figure collection that Cesar has, but I do have the full set of the play arts from Final Fantasy VII. I might even upload a picture of that for the video. And we had kind of talked about it on Twitter a little bit. I do have the Toys R Us exclusive Geonosis Arena, that has like the Nexu, all three monsters,
Oh
has
wow.
Anakin, Obi-Wan, and Perky Padme. And that
Perky
is in a
Padme.
Yep, it's in a pretty good condition box. A little bit of damage on the top, but it is still sealed. And I was big into wrestling figures for a time.
Me too.
And I know it's an unusual collection, but I was obsessed with the Bellas. And I have basically every Bella action figure. Some of the original two packs are pretty pricey now, up around $100. And I have like the full collection of the action figures that were targeted towards girls for all the divas, and I actually have the full collection of the divas Barbies too. So pretty unusual little collection there, but those are a couple of the things that I really got into. So it's a beautiful thing to do. Collecting figures is endlessly fun, and it's always a beautiful thing to see a collection like yours. So my next question, we kind of roll into that from here. With such a big emphasis on the figures and all the space they take up, I want to talk about your game collection some, and kind of talk about what's in it, but also how do you make space for that, and how do you decide to display that alongside all those beautiful figures?
Oof. It took a lot of shelf building and moving a lot of shelves around. Actually, where the game collection walls stand up now was where the Godzilla collection used to be. And when I first started down here in this man cave of mine, I had a lot of empty space. So I was able to really move things around and kind of refocus the entertainment system to be more of like the CesArcade that I, bring up all the time.
Mhm.
It's kind of like my own personal arcade experience. All these games, I was able to like section certain parts off to the point where there's a clear distinction between like the hobby of the action figure collecting and the video game side of things. So there's a clear split, and I have basically like whatever video game merchandise and action figures that I do own displayed on those shelves. And the shelves, I think I'm going to need another one at some point, but I'm starting to run out of room for games as well.
Wow. I know in a couple of your videos, I see the shelves behind you, and I'm like, this guy has almost as an impressive game collection as he does a figure collection. So, what do you focus on collecting right now as far as games?
So right now, well, a couple of months ago, I started getting back into GameCube collecting, which it's a rabbit hole. Let's just leave it at that. A very expensive rabbit hole. Uh, Last year, it was like Dreamcast. Then I got into the Saturn. Then I got into like getting some games for the Genesis. And then I just kind of, transitioned into collecting for the GameCube again. As of right now, I'm just kind of all over the place. I'm picking up things here and there for the Sega Saturn again. Uh, right now, like my biggest focus on collecting is Shenmue stuff.
That's awesome.
Anything I can get from Shenmue, I'm doing my best to get because I want to make a shelf dedicated to Shenmue.
Did they release Shenmue figures in Japan?
They didn't. They released maybe like one Shenhua figurine, and I looked at it, and it's not a good figure.
Oh, that sucks.
It doesn't look good at all. Like I know First Four Figures made a Ryo Hazuki statue, and I believe a Lang Di statue, but if you want to talk about holy grails, that's probably one of them. It's hard to find, and they were limited. So you can imagine all the hardcore Shenmue guys and fans scoop those up as soon as possible.
So, do you use any apps like GameEye or anything to track your collection?
No, and I really should.
Yeah, I know we had a good conversation about carrying insurance. I'm actually considering making a video about that. Definitely suggest GameEye. It's a great way to keep track of the aggregate value of your games and stuff. So, as far as your game collection, what would you say are your three holy grails?
Oh, that's a good question, actually. In terms of my collection, video game wise, I would say Sonic Adventure 2 on the Dreamcast.
Beautiful.
That's one of them that I always was like I said, I didn't own a Dreamcast growing up, but I remember seeing the commercials for Sonic Adventure 2. And I don't know if you remember those commercials. It was like in a lab, and there was a guy in there with a hedgehog, and he's like getting ripped to shreds by it because they were kind of like showing how Shadow was the bad hedgehog.
Yep.
So that ad always stood out to me the most, and I was like, oh man, I always wanted to get that game. So now that I have that one, that's one of the holy grails. Uh, Rule of Rose on the PS2 was probably the most I've ever spent on a video game.
What did you pay for it?
Oh my god, it was like around close to 300, and it wasn't even complete. That's the hard part about it. It's missing the manual.
Ooh.
That one, and this is something that I didn't mention before, but when it came to collecting expensive video games and just building up this collection again, I had to downsize my figure collection in certain series. Like I had a big Dragon Ball Z collection, and I ended up selling most, if not all of those, to start building up this game collection again. So it kind of like, sell one hobby to fund another hobby.
Right.
That's kind of how I look at it, and that's kind of how I justify it. But at the same time, $300 is a lot of money to spend on one single game.
Yeah.
And since I'm a huge fan of like the survival horror games, I really wanted some Rule of Rose. So I'm pretty glad I have that one.
For
Yeah.
me, Rule of Rose, I bought it back years ago off eBay. I paid at that time $100 for pristine complete. That was quite an investment because it's going for about $500 or $600 now.
Yeah.
And then everyone kind of made fun of me. I was out in GameStop with a couple of my friends a couple of years ago, and I picked up Devil's Third used for $59.99. And someone said, "Why would you pay $60 for a used Wii U game?" And I said, "Just watch." And sure enough, that one's going for about $350 right now.
Look who's laughing now, right?
Right. And the other couple, Suikoden 2, was one I had to rebuy because my dumbass traded it into Funko Land when I was a little kid.
Oh my God.
And that broke my heart. That was one of my favorite games. I paid about $100 for that pristine around the same time I bought Rule of Rose. And then I received Kodelka, which was another beloved game from my childhood as a Christmas gift from a friend. And then another $60 Wii U game that I bought and got teased for was Turbo Super Stunt Squad, the one with the racing snails.
Oh yeah, that's apparently one of the most rarest Wii U
Yep,
games
it
ever
goes for
made.
about $250 now. So, and I don't sell anymore. I used to be a reseller, but it's cool to know that your shit is valuable. I'm sure you feel that too. You'd never sell your figures, but to sit there and be like, "This Godzilla's worth $500, dude," that feels cool.
It does. It's kind of like, it almost like it feeds your ego in a way. Like, I'm not trying to sound like a jerk here, but hey, just to be surrounded by all this basically money is a nice feeling. It's nice to look at all these things and see the value in them. But it's more heartfelt. It's not just the monetary value. It's like, what does this mean to me personally?
Yeah, absolutely. And
And
my
that,
stuff,
yeah.
I don't buy things online. I actually want to say probably the last games I bought online were those many years ago. I very much hunt in the wild. So when I find something that's exceedingly rare or I think has a high future value, it's so exciting because I'm handling it all with my own hands. And I'm finding it in a Goodwill or a pawn shop or at GameStop. You can even catch GameStop slipping sometimes. Um, you know, I just love doing it. And I love going to flea markets. I used to pick 2 or 3 times a week when I ran. Cold Nights actually originally came from, that was the name of my eBay store, where we would buy toys, plushes, games, trading cards, and we would resell. And then at some point, when my main career as a manager with Walmart took off, I stopped reselling, but I didn't stop buying. So now I have my hoard. So
It's always so satisfying to actually be there in person and
yeah.
get these games in a hunt. Uh, I unfortunately, places out here, I live in the middle of nowhere in the Poconos, so like there are places maybe like an hour or two away. I did a video on my first and probably like only video game hunt video. There was actually a retro video game store that I just discovered by chance. And that's where I bought the Dreamcast. And I managed to buy a few games from them. They're a nice store. Really, the prices on them are pretty competitive. They're not like overcharging too much, you know what I mean? But like they're they're a nice store. I just wish there were more of them out here, and if there are, I have to discover them
It's
because
such a great joy to find something for a real steal. Probably my two greatest ones I ever found. I got my top loader Nintendo with two dog bone controllers for $5 at Goodwill. And the console there is $100 and those controllers are $50 each. And then I got my Atari Jaguar at a flea market for $100. So, and that is a very hard to find, very expensive system with terrible games. There's not really much going on there. It's not something I kick back and play, but from a collector's standpoint, it's something special to have for sure.
oh yeah, it's so cool to have one of those. I like you never see those, you know what I mean? Nobody even talks about them really, but they're collectibles, like you said, and to be able to get them like that for those prices, oh, I'm jealous.
So if there was one game right now that you want so bad, not a new game, but something, from the past, what would it be? What is kind of the thing you wish you could get right now?
It's funny. I was waiting for this question to pop up. My wife and I were. She's a fan of the series, the manga, and like the characters. She has some of the figures of them. But this is like a holy grail. The biggest holy grail in terms of video games for me would be Magic Knight Rayearth on the Sega Saturn.
Ooh,
That has it all. That has
gotta save up.
it's oh my god, it's got the big box. You know what I mean? It's got a holographic cover art, which that's like my fetish, the holographic cover arts. And it's on the Sega Saturn, a console that didn't get that many games out here in the US. And it was a console I always wanted. I have now, but to get that game is gonna be, oh man, I don't know how I'm gonna do it. I want to do it, but
What's that going for? Like $1,200?
I've seen it go for around $1,200. The game store that I went to, the video game store in Wilkes-Barre, PA, has it. They actually have it for like 900 something dollars.
Wow. And that's a steal
That's a steal, and
at $900.
I know, and it's like it varies in price depending on how complete it is, because there were three different versions of the disc printed, which one for each character, all the same game, just three different versions of it.
Hmm.
And the actual manual has stickers in the back that you can actually use. I'm looking at one on eBay right now, which unfortunately doesn't have the stickers, but is cheaper. It's going for maybe $100 less than 900. So I'm like teetering. I'm like, I want it, but how am I going to justify this purchase?
Tax time.
Oh, seriously.
For me, I actually made a choice back when I bought that Rule of Rose game. It was either Rule of Rose or Kuon, and I chose Rule of Rose. So it makes me sad that however many years ago that was, I could have got Kuon for about $120 because that's going for about $700 or $800. And I've watched playthroughs of it, but I would love to sit down and play that game. So that's definitely mine.
I 100% agree with you. In fact, I picked up Haunting Grounds when it was still available at GameStop pre-owned, and I still
Wow.
have it to this day. Unfortunately, the cover art and manual got destroyed because of the water damage, but I still had the disc, so I ended up having a reprinted cover art, and it's just missing the manual. But the fact that I have that and Rule of Rose, best 2 out of 3, I guess.
Right. That's pretty damn cool.
I don't think I'll ever be able to afford Kuon though.
Yeah, that one's getting out of control. So, I'm wondering, what are your plans for 2023 for your content on both channels?
In terms of plans for the main figure channel. I just want to keep doing what I do. Uh, try to do a little bit more than I did towards the end of last year, where I kind of, uploads were few and far between. And it's, I make some revenue off that channel, and I kind of want to keep that going. It's where I've got a good number of subscribers on that one, and I don't want to abandon it. So I definitely want to get back into that. I have a few figures lined up to review, and I always have a ton of figures from my backlog to review as well. So it's just hard finding the time to make those videos, because you really have to. Anybody could do a toy review, right? But
Right.
I try to implement my toy photography into those videos as well. And whenever I can, I try to give a fair, decent review for each figure. So just more of the same for that. In terms of the CesArcade, I definitely want to talk more about collecting video games, continuing with the Rebuilding the Game Wall series. I want to start a new series called Random Game Encounters, and I think I've only told you and one other person. So forgive me if you've heard this before from some other channel, but I want to basically write down each game that I have, log it, and kind of do like a random number generator, so that each game is logged, and I just hit that random number generator and the game pops up. And what I do is I'll basically talk about that game and give my thoughts on it. It's less of a review, but also I want to give the game a fair shake, and then talk about what the game is going for and if it's probably worth picking up.
That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, so I kind of want to make it look like a random like encounter, like in terms of like how Pokemon does it, where you
Yeah.
just kind of like it's a battle with this game. So that's my goal for the channel for that, and focus a little bit more on my other series that I made just started last year, Monster Mayhem, which focuses mainly about video games regarding giant monsters such as Godzilla, Ultraman, Primal Rage. I have a video in the works for that,
Nice.
and more games like that, and also show off the figures in those videos.
That's actually a cool crossover.
Yeah, it's something I've always wanted to do once I launched this channel, and I think I'll get to it this year.
Good deal. All right, so we're getting up against the time here a little bit, but real quick, I want to ask you, what are the top 3 games you're looking forward to coming out this year?
Top 3 games I'm looking forward to this year are what's coming out this year.
A lot of stuff.
So I'm so lost. There's a few games coming out. Fire Emblem Engage.
Looks beautiful.
I have that on. I just got the notification from GameStop that that's coming out soon. So I'm looking forward to that. How about you? Help me out
Uh,
here.
so for me, it's definitely Fire Emblem Engage. And then I'm hugely interested in, hopefully it doesn't get pushed back, but the Silent Hill 2 remake.
Okay.
That's a real big deal. And of course, my favorite series of all time, Fatal Frame Mask of the Lunar Eclipse. That's going to be huge. And that'll be the first time it's on our shores. Fortunately, not physical. I'm hoping for like a Japanese English release, but there's nothing planned. So digital only, but I'm super excited about it.
Oh, it's confirmed. It's getting a physical, and PlayAsia is going to have it
And
with
I
English
hate
support.
PlayAsia, but
Oh,
yeah, I'll have to buy it then.
yeah, I'm going to have to import a few of those myself. And yeah, so those are good picks. And I have the other two that I'm looking forward to. All right, so I'm looking forward to the Resident Evil 4 remake.
That's going to be huge.
I am so excited for how that's going to turn out. I was really let down by Resident Evil Remake 3, but I really liked the second remake for part 2. So I'm
Fully
hoping
agree.
that's good. And Dead Space, I'm looking forward to the remake for that as well.
That looks incredible as well.
Those are my 3 games.
Good deal. All right. So, Cesar, tell our listeners once again where they can find you on YouTube and Twitter and Instagram.
On Twitter, you can find me at SpaceyG, which was my old nickname, but it's also ScorpioCesar now. And on YouTube, you can find the figure channel is ScorpioCesar, and my gaming channel is ScorpioCesarcade.
All right, good deal. We will make sure to link those in the descriptions on YouTube and Spotify for everyone to check out. So, Cesar, once again, I thank you for coming on. Incredible show, incredible collection, and I'm sure we'll have you on again soon.
I appreciate it, Jay. Thank you for having me on. It's an honor.
All right, good deal. So remember, folks, next week we have the very special JRPG edition featuring Brandon from Just the Gems and Emily from Orbology. So make sure we tune in for that. And as always, thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and stay creepy.